Welcome.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our May, can you believe it, May Tuesday Talks. We're very pleased tonight to offer a program focused on Indigenous peoples. But before we get started, I had a call this afternoon from Wilf Wilkinson, all apologetic that he couldn't join us tonight. He loves the Tuesday Talks, but it's his 92nd birthday. So I think we should sing happy birthday to Wilf. What do you think?
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Will. Happy birthday to you. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
I'm Beth. I'm Beth. I'm Beth. I'm Beth. I told them not to attend tonight.
You did?
I did.
So anyway, he called to say that his family had all of a sudden decided to have this birthday celebration. Yeah. I will tell him that we sang happy birthday and tell him it was a terrible rendition, but he can view it for himself on the YouTube channel after the fact.
Yeah.
Just want to remind everybody to, during the presentation, to please mute yourself and to please put your questions in the chat. Bill Empey, who has been kind enough to organize tonight, and in a moment I will turn the program over to him. He will be monitoring the chat and at the appropriate time bringing questions forward. I should also let you know, for those of you who are attending the district conference this weekend, that Bill will be giving the land acknowledgement at the district conference. So Bill, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Okay. Let me just share my screen. And I'm trusting that everyone can see the screen. And thank you all for joining. And thank you, Beth. And we're going to begin by sending up lots of positive energy to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And tonight, we're going to be introducing you to an exciting and innovative exhibition of Indigenous history, Misko-Aki. It's a new exhibit at the Muskoka Steamship and Discovery Center in Gravenhurst. And I want to start off by saying that HIP enthusiastically endorses this project. It represents a new standard in our view of presenting Indigenous history and culture. And tonight, the leaders of this project and the award-winning designer are going to guide you through the highlights. So let me just begin with some short introductions and tell you a little bit about our time together. I'm going to begin. I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Toronto and have been involved with the Indigenous Committee there for many years. And about a year ago, I took on the task of being district coordinator for 7070 for HIP, Honoring Indigenous Peoples. And I'm just going to take a moment at the beginning here and talk about HIP. And then I'm going to come back at the end and I'm going to talk about how Rotary clubs can be involved in the Misko-Aki experience. So Gary Getson, who is, I think, 10 years with the Muskoka Steamship and Discovery Center and the board chair, is going to start things off with some background to the project. Rick McGraw, who also has, I think, 30 years of experience with Muskoka Steamship and Discovery Center, is going to be giving us a bit of fundraising status and the targets for the project. And the main event tonight is Tim Johnson, the project director. Tim is the award-winning designer of exhibits for the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian Institute. And he's working on Indigenous education programs in the Niagara area. And Tim is Mohawk from the Six Nations community in Brantford, Ontario. So let me just start off with a few words about HIP. HIP builds partnerships between Rotary clubs and the Indigenous community. Our vision is to strengthen these relationships and prepare future leaders for the process of reconciliation. There's a natural affinity, you know, between Rotary and the Indigenous community. One way that you can understand that is if you compare the four-way test that we all know well with the 7 grandfather wisdoms that Indigenous communities share, you're going to find that's a perfect starting place to understand the shared values that draw us together. HIP is working with 89 Rotary clubs and 18 districts across Canada and Rotary clubs in the United States and in Australia. So we suggest a process for building these relationships. It begins with awareness, and then it builds with learning to relationships and to find ways of working together. All of this is guided by the wisdom of our Indigenous partners. In fact, all HIP activities follow the priorities that are set by Indigenous leaders. There's many, many ways that HIP has to encourage and build these relationships. We begin with shared concerns, things like the focus on the environment, on youth, on community well-being. We encourage clubs to visit powwows and land acknowledgements. Let me begin with that right now. We can acknowledge that we are here on land that's been inhabited by the Indigenous community for 15,000 years. We acknowledge the contribution here of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. When we talk about land acknowledgements, we often encourage people to bring a personal quality to it. And I just want to take a moment to do that. Because my ancestors, German ancestors, in the year 1709, were in a refugee camp near London. There was a Mohawk chief visiting London at that time. And when he saw the wretched conditions in that refugee camp, he invited the refugees to land, to Mohawk land, that's now in what we call the Hudson River Valley in New York. I just want to begin by acknowledging that extraordinary generosity. And for me, it speaks to the critical importance for non-Indigenous people to understand history the way it's told and the way it works for the Indigenous community. And that's where Misko-Aki fits in. Misko-Aki is history told by Indigenous leaders from each of the communities that shared the Muskoka region long before settlers arrived. As you're going to see tonight, that history spans 10,000 years. And I'm going to ask Barry Getson to start us on that journey.
Thank you, Bill, very much. It's really a pleasure to be able to present to the Rotary leadership and Rotary HIP members tonight. And this is a really exciting project, Misko-Aki, Confluence of Cultures. And the interest you've shown over the last 6 months has been spectacular. And particularly District 7070 and also 7010 and Rotary HIP. You're all very special people. And so we appreciate your help in helping us increase the awareness and also the funding of the project. So let me set the scene on how this story of our Indigenous heritage became a major part of our project. You may have cruised the Muskoka Lakes in the RMS Seguin or Winona 2, or visited the Discovery Center. But if you're not aware, Muskoka Steamships and Discovery Center has hosted in non-COVID years 35 to 45,000 passengers annually and approximately 20,000 visitors to the Muskoka Discovery Center. And in 2014, we made the decision to revitalize our Discovery Center and transform it to a cultural hub for all of Muskoka. We established water as the central theme. After all, there's 1,600 lakes and rivers in the Muskoka watershed, and does set it apart. And therefore, the environment is a central reason for this area being a world-recognized destination. Well, every 2 years, up to COVID times, that is, there was an environmental summit held in Bracebridge. drawing on North American experts. And in 2018, at this summit, one of the keynote speakers was Dan Longboat. Dan may be known by some of you. Dan is a member of the Turtle Clan of the Mohawk Nation and is an associate professor at the Cheney Winjack School for Indigenous Studies at Trent University. Well, this conference was about restoring our relationship with the natural world. I was so inspired by what Dan said. It was evident to me that we could not achieve our vision without the inclusion of Indigenous peoples as equal contributors of their cultural practices that have been in Muskoka for thousands of years, prior to the more recent European settlement, the last 200, 250 years. And shortly after that, at a subsequent meeting of our advisory council and board, it was unanimous that we must include Indigenous heritage. However, it was well recognized that it would be challenging. So that was the beginning of the journey that continues. Helping us set this course is Chief Ted Williams of Rama First Nation. In fact, he spoke at the Toronto Club last Friday. Many of you were there, I'm sure. Ted tells the story in a humorous manner of how intent we were to achieve immediate results with our flip charts and pens, when in fact we had not yet built a relationship, fundamental to doing anything together. We all know that relationships are vital, particularly Rotarians. However, with Indigenous peoples, it is fundamental, particularly given their history with settler culture. So that was 3 years ago, and things today have changed in a big way, but the journey continues person by person. So equally important, Dan Longboat introduced us to Tim Johnson, a Mohawk from Six Nations, with his amazing talent. He led the development of, as Bill said, the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian Institute, where he spent 10 plus years. After we spoke to him, within a week, Tim assembled a team, a magnificently talented team. And the result of that is that all of the content, curation, object selection, presentation are all being guided entirely by Indigenous scholars, language experts, including elders from the present and historic First Nations that inhabited Muskoka. Tim's leadership is the key reason this project has the authenticity and quality it does. So the objective of Misko-Aki, Confluence of Cultures, it's to change the understanding and appreciation among Indigenous and non-Indigenous visitors. How are we going to do that? We're going to do it by revealing Indigenous history, culture, and sustainability values. Now, we recognize the trauma that underlines and informs many Indigenous communities. But it's projects like this that will facilitate healing and relationship development. So that's a bit of a background to give you how this thing got started. And I'm delighted to introduce Rick McGraw. Rick is the chair of the Revitalization Project. He's also the chair of our fundraising. And so Rick, over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Well, thank you, Rotary, for giving us the opportunity to speak about Misko-Aki. You've all been in projects throughout your life, and you know, some are different than others, and some you know are very special and that allow you to get excited and passionate about it. And Misko-Aki, Confluence of Cultures, is one of those for us. It's truly something remarkable, and Gary's touched on a lot of the background there that's very relevant to how it is going to be special. But I'd like to add a few things about it. So our goal here with the revitalization is to build a better cultural hub for Muskoka and Canada. A cultural hub, learning center, there's lots of labels you can put on it, but what we want is a center where there's information being presented, different points of view discussed, and people come there and they learn and they walk away with questions in their mind, think maybe it'll change their behavior, and just all around being a learning and an entertaining experience, because we can't all be scholars right now, you know, for every minute, but we're going to make a presentation for people that they will remember and walk away better for it. So the revitalization involves a 12,000 square foot addition to our existing building. And you can somewhat see it in my background there. It's out over the water. It's a beautiful building, mostly wood construction. And we're going to have 3 exhibits in that exhibit hall. One is the Misko-Aki, Confluence of Cultures. The second one is Evolving Muskoka, which is living on the edge of the shield. And Wanda 3, presenting the past and sustaining the future. So I'll go to the Evolving Muskoka. This is sort of the last 200, 250 years of history in Muskoka, what's happened, and all the conflicts and resolutions that shape Muskoka that you know today, or you will find it when you get there. Wanda 3 is a 109-year-old steam yacht, and we're restoring her and electrifying her. But for us, she's a symbol of sustainability and a new way for anyone who cares about the climate. We hope we all do. And it's going to be a marvelous working artifact that will sail the lakes once again. Now go back to Misko-Aki, which is really, as I said, very special. Gary's talked about how this is so authentic, and we're very proud of that. And we say really, we're hosting this exhibit because the way it's being developed is unusual for any other exhibit in our place. And as you're going to discover when you get to meet Tim Johnson in a few minutes, why it's so special, because he's an incredible professional. We expect when we put these 3 exhibits, we're going to have, as I said, a very unusual visitor experience. We hope that will result in 50,000 people coming through this new building and the rest of our center there. The cost of the project is $8.6 million, and there's a lot of construction in that number, but these exhibits are also very expensive, and Misko-Aki by herself is $1.3 million. And that's when you get professional world-class designers and you have fabrication, and it's a magnificent 3,000 square foot exhibit. And Tim's going to speak to it. To date, we have raised 6.6 million. So we have 2 million to go. The money has come from individuals, communities, foundations, and all 3 levels of government. In some cases, not enough from one of those governments, but anyway. And we've run multiple campaigns. There's small campaigns, big campaigns. And so we're really excited and appreciate Rotary's interest in running a campaign to cover the cost of some of the artifacts and commissions that will make up Misko-Aki. They're important, as Tim will explain. And we thank you for your interest. And I want to go to the next slide. Somebody's got control of it. Just to give you a picture of how this 6.6 million has come to date. So you can see the federal government's up there, the District of Muskoka, the province of Ontario, Canadian Heritage was an interesting one. And I forgot actually to mention about Misko-Aki, it's not just an exhibit, a physical exhibit, it's also a digital program that will be, it's very well produced digital program that will be available, make this content that we're building, and Tim's going to describe, make it available to the world. So that's where Canadian Heritage came in, and they came alongside Bank of Nova Scotia to underwrite the cost of that, which is $250,000. And so these other names of foundations and individuals are people that have given significant amounts of money, anywhere from $10,000 to $500,000. And then we have 200 other individuals who have given lesser amounts of money. And if we had the right size of page, we'd have them all on there, because we appreciate every single donation, and they all add up. It takes big checks and small checks, but that's how it comes. So thank you again for agreeing to help us. And I'd like to now turn it over to Tim Johnson, who is the secret sauce of this whole Misko-Aki, Confluence of Cultures.
Well, thank you, Rick and Gary, and thank you, Bill, for that poignant opening. And indeed, my Mohawk ancestors were engaged with your Palatine ancestors, German ancestors, in the Hudson Mohawk River Valley areas of New York and Schoharie. And in some ways, through the course of history, these relations actually were lost. And now through this, and during this age of truth and reconciliation, we're seeking to rebuild those relationships. So thank you all for being here tonight, and are happy to present the exhibition that we're producing in Gravenhurst. And I was sort of happily semi-retired until Rick and Gary pulled me out of that environment and into this work. And it's been a pretty hectic, busy time for the last year and a half. But these guys are very generous with their compliments, but I do want to stress that the way these projects come together is through process and partnerships, and the talents that are brought into the process add value every step of the way. And as they add that value, you keep working towards something that hopefully will emerge beyond your expectation at the outset. So that's where we're starting from. So I want to take you inside the exhibition and the process right now. So if we can go to the next slide on screen and share that with everyone. There we go. So the Misko-Aki, meaning red earth, it's Anishinaabe phrase, and Confluence of Cultures. And we called the exhibition Confluence of Cultures because of the transportation routes that led from and to the Muskoka region over millennia. And whether you're looking to move east, west, north, or south, the navigation of the highways or the waterways and the lakes were the manner in which Indigenous peoples travel and traded. And then later on, after European contact, that trade continued. So if we can go on to the next slide. So there are, what we've been seeking to do with the exhibition really is to find a way to present a tremendous amount of history in a very condensed space of 3,000 square feet. And so, we're going back, some 13,000 years by the archaeological record of Indigenous inhabitation of the region, and then showing some evidence of that inhabitation through archaeological materials, but then moving fairly quickly then into the historic period. And we are focusing on 4 culture groups, Indigenous culture groups: the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Metis, and the Mohawk, the Niagara, among the Haudenosaunee people. So that's our focus area. And the interpretive goals of the exhibition include focusing on this ethos, this sort of principle of the dish with one spoon. The dish with one spoon was actually an indigenous to indigenous agreement. There was sort of a prehistorical event whereby the indigenous peoples of the region decided that they were going to share those resources in a way that was equitable and peaceful. So this concept, really hits the mark for us in terms of what we want to get out of the overall exhibition, but was also instrumental in terms of the process itself. Because to do an exhibition like this, it meant us having to bring in representatives from those 4 different culture groups to work together and sort through their history together. Sometimes that history included conflict. And so this centering our philosophy and our value system within the process on the dish with one spoon was really important, because this was a significant challenge that Gary and Rick brought to me and brought to our group, was to how are we going to navigate through these very complex issues. So, but that principle held up very well. So the ethos is the dish with one spoon concept. And our intent is to convey to visitors a long and rich history of Indigenous peoples in the Misko-Aki region, highlight the unique landscape of the area, which not only drew Indigenous peoples to the region, but of course continues to drive Canadians up to cottage country and to enjoy the environment that is there, that wonderful geographic experience. And, but also to, throughout and where we could within the exhibition, speak to the sort of environmental values that are inherent within many of these Indigenous cultures. I often refer to these as empathic traditions, that these are part of the meta-narratives of the people that teach humans to respect other life forms and energies within their world, because that's what sustains us in our lives. And then also to celebrate the creativity and strength of the region's Indigenous people. And through this, really contribute to the process of truth and reconciliation. And what we find in these 94 recommendations that came out of the truth and reconciliation process is that the rubber really hits the road in the area of organizations like the Muskoka Discovery Center, and particularly at the municipal level, sometimes more than the provincial or national level. That's where the relationships are really being built very directly and with a real stated purpose. So if we can move to the next slide, talk about the key characteristics of the visitor experience. As Gary and Rick had mentioned, by ensuring that the content is being developed and presented by Indigenous peoples, we're really working to ensure the authenticity of the content from an Indigenous perspective. And that was really, really important. And I have to say that the leadership at the Muskoka Center has adhered to this policy extremely well. And we're very appreciative of that. At the same time, we maintain good transparency so that they're aware of what we're doing and where we're going. And if there's any issues that we have to deal with, we certainly share those with the leadership there right away. We want the exhibit to be accessible, not just physically, but intellectually. For it to be social, the exhibits plan to encourage dialogue and interaction with other visitors. In fact, we see once the exhibit is unveiled, that it opens up the door to all kinds of public programming that can then take place to further enhance the dialogue and to ensure an informed civic discourse around Indigenous issues. We want visitors to participate in the process. There will be a number of stations within the exhibit that allow them to get engaged, interactive types of experiences. And in terms of technology, we're not going overboard on technology with this exhibition. We don't want to use that just for its own sake, but really just place it where we think it's appropriate to convey the information that we want to convey. Next slide, please. The thematic framework here is, I think, illustrated well in this graphic. The center, of course, is the confluence of cultures, where we're looking at many paths and many cultures and many worldviews. And then here again, building upon this idea of all of these tributaries and navigation routes coming together. We have the landscape, earth-centered philosophies, historical events that are important as we need to learn about these various communities, Indigenous communities that are within Muskoka, Indigenous principles and wisdom for sustainability, and also Indigenous creative expression. On that particular one, that was when we talked about very early in the process. The Discovery Center does not have a large collection of Indigenous objects and artifacts to draw upon for the exhibition. So even at the earliest parts of the process here, we knew that we would need to reach out to community members to see what they have to offer, but also to commission artists to produce specific works that would help to illustrate and enhance the themes that we're trying to get across in the exhibition. So that is shaping up well, and a little bit later in my presentation, we'll show what some of those objects are that are coming in the door currently. So the thematic framework is important, and we've adhered to that throughout the process. So we can go to the next slide. And then how do you take all of this complexity of history? I mean, every community could be its own, a PhD paper. And so a lot of times exhibition work really requires significant editing and selection. And that works best when you have a strong, effective concept that allows for that interpretation to be understood by the visitor. So what we did here was sort of place this exhibition experience within the context of a symbolic canoe journey that would take people through the landscape. So again, the exhibition is relating also to sort of the current understandings of what Muskoka is by most Canadians, the waterways, the islands, and all of that. And so our thought and idea was to create this canoe journey where you would land on different islands, if you will, these landing areas. And on each landing area would have its specific purpose. And you sort of stop there and then learn and engage the content at each of these landing areas. So we start with the welcome and focusing on a Pope petroglyph that indicates a very early inhabitation of Indigenous peoples in the region. The great dish, as we described earlier, the dish with one spoon, and the earth-centered philosophy, explanation of the clans. Actually, several of these culture groups have clan systems. The Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee all have clan systems. Several of these clans are the same totems or animals. And so that's an interesting presentation there. And then looking at the fish weirs, the Majikaning fish weirs that go back thousands of years and have sustained Indigenous peoples for many, many, many generations. Then we move on to the second landing, which is a Huron-Wendat experience, the third landing on Anishinaabe communities, fourth landing, the cold water experiment, a little bit more detail on some of the Anishinaabe experience. Then we move on to the Metis people, and then the arrival of the Wata Mohawks. And then 7, very important that we focus on the land issues that these people had to contend with in terms of the Williams Treaty and what the antecedents were to all of that, and also the outcomes. And then the last landing experience really is a reflection, a contemplation of all of the issues and information that people encounter on this epic journey, with a nod towards the importance of sustaining the environment and the relationship to the earth. Next slide, please. So the means of expression within the exhibition, we talked about the objects, having these iconic objects at each of the landings. Listening stations, opportunities for visitors to listen to audio or watch video of contemporary Indigenous peoples. Also these indigenuity components within each landing area. We'll focus on an example of Indigenous ingenuity. And then the visitor engagement opportunities throughout the gallery for visitors to share their ideas. So with that set up, let's go on to the next slide and start to look at what this is going to look like. So here you can see the canoe, which will be hung over the atrium, leading down to the, looking down to the first floor gallery. And you can see that on the floor of this, this exhibition, there'll be a graphic that indicates a river or a stream that takes people through, guides them through the exhibition. And here again, you can see these elements that we went through, the various landings. Let's go to the next one. Next slide. Now, you're getting a kind of an interesting view here because our designers did a terrific job on figuring out how to actually segment each of these landing areas. And in the building, there are these really beautiful laminate support beams that go across from one side of the hall to the other. And from these beams will hang these fabric sheets, if you will, that will have printed sort of landscape imagery from Muskoka on the fabric. So we're actually kind of bringing people into this environment, into this Muskoka experience, and kind of enveloping them in that experience as they go along through this journey. And we have some illustrations that our design team put together. Let's move on to the next one, and you'll get a sense of what this is going to look like. So here you can see the canoe. We do have a canoe made by the Historic Canoe in the collection of the Muskoka Discovery Center, actually, that comes from Rama. And you can see this large dish, this concept of the dish. This has many more spoons. This was an early conceptual design before our designers really picked up on the one spoon idea. But you can see that there. And then there'll be a wampum belt that also indicates the symbolism of that particular experience. But I wanted to draw your attention as well to these beautiful laminate beams that you see inside the hall. And from those hanging these fabrics that we'll have printed on. These are like a translucent experience, like translucent, they're not opaque, so that you can see the imagery on them of nature, but also see through them a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and you just, as you're walking through, you're basically following that river. Next slide. And here's the Anishinaabe landing. Now, one of the things that's happened is in the evolution of the design process is that these landings actually are being designed to look much more like the rock and land, the land views you would have if you were in fact traveling through Muskoka. So things evolve as you move through the process. And as I mentioned, as people add their talent to it, and things get better and better as you move through. The next slide. And here where we get to the end, where it's a contemplation area, where we want people to really think about what's going on. If you can see the lower right here against the far right wall, if you look down to the bottom of the wall, you'll see a couple of windows there. So as that sort of river gets to this final portion of the exhibition and broadens out into like a lake, and then through those windows, you can actually see the bay below from the building. So it doesn't feel like a termination point. And that was something that we identified very early on in the process, that we needed to really have a look down upon the waters there, so people didn't, people got the sense of continuity once they hit that area. Next slide. And just another image here of the reflection experience. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here. And these are a couple of wampum belts that were created by Brian Curtis for us. and these will be on display in the exhibition. One of these, the one on the bottom part here, is the yellowhead wampum belt reproduction, and the one above is the 1701 sort of Montreal Treaty belt. Okay, so let's move to the next one here. So part of the process as we've been going through this is how to bring in the aesthetics that would sort of connote or, you know, suggest this Indigenous environmental experience and cultural experience. And when I was at the Smithsonian overseeing exhibitions there, and I was chairing the exhibition committee. We met at least once a month, and you would be surprised how much aesthetics played a role in the decision-making process that we had for selecting exhibitions to be mounted in our galleries. But so in this case, with the Discovery Center not having a significant collection, we reached out and did a lot of legwork here to find folks who could produce materials that would be up, you know, I think meet the standards that and expectations we have for high quality aesthetics. And so this is pottery by Richard Zane. He's a Huron-Wendat potter. And we've commissioned from him 2 pots. These aren't the pots, but he's gonna produce new ones for us. One that's in the traditional format that you see on the left, and other is a contemporary piece that carries on that tradition that you can see through the aesthetics, but yet with new, you know, new imagery and symbolism and graphics to help bring out these cultural messages. So this is sort of the level of aesthetics that we're striving for. We go to the next slide, please. And this is an Anishinaabe leather jacket with some beadwork on it. And a part of this here is just the leather material, the aesthetic and the look and feel and texture of that jacket, you know, connotes this sort of earthy type of experience. And Gary brought this to us through some acquaintances of his who are willing to donate it to the exhibition. We go to the next slide. These are sample moccasins made by Merritt Cross, who's a Mohawk moccasin maker. It was a real challenge, a much bigger challenge than I thought, because we wanted to have a representative pair of moccasins from each of the 4 culture groups. And I thought it would be one of the easiest things that we could gather. But it actually took a lot of work to find the artists who were at the level of aesthetic quality that we really wanted to have in the exhibition. So Merritt's producing a new pair of moccasins for us of this level of aesthetics. Now, all of the beadwork that you see here, it has meaning, and so our captions and information associated with these objects will help tell those stories as well. We can move to the next slide. This is some additional beadwork. There's also some porcupine quill work in this piece by a Huron-Wendat artist, Manon Sui, and just wonderful, wonderful work. And so these materials will be properly mounted and displayed within each of these landing areas. Next slide. This is a bespoke Métis beadwork vest. I think go back one slide there. If you could, there you go. This is by Justine Woods, a Métis artist whose work is exceptional. And what you're seeing here, of course, is the application of these Métis symbols on a contemporary piece of clothing. She also makes the vest, by the way. It's not just, she's not pulling a vest off the rack and then putting beadwork on. She actually makes the bespoke vest and then does the Métis work on. So part of this, this conveys the fact that Indigenous peoples are still in the Muskoka region and still active and still very dynamic. You move to the next slide. Christy Belcourt is a renowned Métis artist. And this is a piece of hers that we think is going to work well in the section with the Majikaning fish weirs. And this is an object, art piece painting that is being donated by Gail Lord from Lord Cultural Resources. And so very fortunate to have these kinds of contributions coming in to the exhibition. And Christy Belcourt's work is world renowned. And then the last example of this sort of this exhibition within the exhibition of the contemporary commissioned artworks. If you can go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please.
I think that's it.
I have it. Oh, maybe that's just on my deck and not on yours. But we have a beautiful stone sculpture by Mohawk artist Dale Isaacs, whose work depicts the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, which were the crops that sustained the Indigenous people. I'm wondering if I could share the screen. If is that possible? I can show you that last.
I'll stop sharing here.
Okay, can you see that piece?
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Might be my internet, but in any event, I'll stop sharing here, and just wrap it up there. So hopefully that gave you a pretty good idea of what we're trying to accomplish with the Misko-Aki exhibition, and in terms of our schedule, the script is we're hoping to complete that or be near complete by the end of June, at which point we'll turn our attention to the fabrication and installation phase 3 aspect of the work, and we'll also pick up the workload on the digital exhibition. So that's where we're at.
Tim, it's Rick. Could you just give 2 minutes description about your circle of advisors and how that all has worked? I know you've touched on it, but it goes to the heart of how this is authentic. It goes to the heart of the community involvement, volunteerism, everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that really was the first challenge, was given the fact that we wanted to present the Indigenous story of Muskoka, which had several different culture groups either inhabiting or traversing the area through time. It was important that we reach out to those communities, to those groups, to get their involvement. As Rick and Gary had mentioned, the Rama First Nations community. Ted Williams was supportive from the get-go, working with an elder from that community, Mark Douglas, who's been very, very helpful. At the Wata First Nation, Tim Thompson and Luann Hill McDonald, both elders. And this is something we hadn't programmed or actually designed in, was to have this an advisory circle that was comprised predominantly of elders. But it worked out that way, and I think much to our benefit, because they not only came in with experience and knowledge, but also with the right tone and tenor that made this project, this complex project, possible. We've had several folks from the Huron-Wendat nation participating with us over the past year and a half. the Métis Nation, Justine Woods, Aaron Hadaway from Beausoleil First Nation, Jeff Montague, another elder and former chief of his First Nation, Brian Charles from Chippewa and Georgina Island, Vince Chichuk from Wasauksing First Nation. All of these folks have been part of our Indigenous Advisory Circle on the exhibition.
But Tim, your magic, if I may interrupt one more time, is you brought these people together, many of whom didn't know one another, and got them to participate for the last 18 months on a regular basis, quite formally, and sent home for homework and everything else. What's going on here is, I think you have said before, is a form of reconciliation even within that community.
That's right.
It's gone.
Right. Right. I mean, people don't think about that, right? I mean, we think about reconciliation in terms of Canada and First Nations, but our history shows us that we've all often been in conflict with each other. And so there's often need for reconciliation among Indigenous peoples as well. And so that was the case. But I think to a certain extent, we sort of got lucky. You have an understanding of what you want to achieve, but when it comes to human beings, it's always complex. But I think we got lucky, the fact that the folks that did come around our circle really came with the right intention and really wanted to make this thing work.
So I'm just going to finish off with a couple of PowerPoints that describe how the Rotary clubs can become involved. And I think it's really important to understand that what we see here in Misko-Aki is a microcosm that crosses all of Ontario. The Indigenous communities that Tim just described that are part of that history, they're all across Ontario. They could well be your neighbors. And in fact, there's an opportunity to use Misko-Aki in your club as a way of extending a lot of the focuses and a lot of the priorities for your club. So for example, if you have an environmental community or environmental interest, you can go to that group and explain how the Indigenous community brings a very distinctive and very long-term historical perspective on stewardship of the environment. Or if you have a youth group, you can bring the youth in and teach them about youth and ways in which they can understand the long-standing history that they probably haven't been exposed to for Indigenous people. There's lots of ways for clubs to relate to this, and indeed for your community to understand that the Misko-Aki story is something that can be applied really across all of Ontario. So HIP wants to help you do that. We want to, as we go forward, introduce Misko-Aki to Rotary clubs all across 7070, and Richard Denton from District 7010 has already indicated that Misko-Aki is going to be a focus in the upcoming Rotary year in that district. In fact, Richard's suggesting that a target for 7010 would be Misko-Aki presented in all 41 clubs across the coming year, with a target for donations of $50,000. So I'm suggesting, why couldn't we do something like that in 7070? Why not intend right now to offer to all the clubs a presentation of Misko-Aki so that they can understand this exciting possibility and they can think about a donation? And I think it's particularly interesting to note that there's this opportunity to donate around artifacts and original art. That's something that's very important. It's clearly a priority for Misko-Aki, and I think it's the way that each of the clubs might get involved. So I'm going to unshare the screen now. And I guess we've got just a couple of minutes for some questions. There was one question that I spotted, which is, and I think it may have got answered, but just to be specific, when will the exhibit open, or do we know? And what about the digital version? Tim?
Well, I'll leave that to Rick and Gary, who are guiding the overall process on this new extension.
We expect the exhibit and the digital version to be unveiled in June of next year. There's a lot of things dependent on that, but that's our target.
So I have a question here. This could be an interesting one. If people own artifacts, who should they contact that will potentially donating them?
Well, Ann Curley, the curator of the Discovery Center, is on this meeting, on this call. And I would say she's probably the appropriate frontline person to engage with people who have artifacts to share.
Maybe Ann could put an email in the chat. I put my email in the chat right at the very beginning, and I want to encourage you to understand that HIP is a resource and that we look forward to, and in fact, we'll be reaching out to the clubs to encourage them to take up some time in one of their meetings to talk about Misko-Aki and join us in this important initiative and take advantage of this really unique way of describing Indigenous history. Okay. Let me check the chat for other questions. Has anybody any questions?
I don't see any other questions, Bill. I do see that Anne put her contact information in the chat. So to answer one of our viewers' questions, that's how you can contact her.
Do I have a question? Do I have a minute for one more question?
One more question.
Where is there a place in the exhibit that talks about the impact of settlers on on the history that you've been describing?
Probably in several, if not most of the landings, right? Because as we get into the history of each of these culture groups, we tell their story in terms of what experience they had after contact with Europeans. And we do have that section devoted to the Williams treaties as well. So yes.
And in the main floor, there are some areas there where we talk about the impact of technology, i.e. steam technology, and how it just totally disrupted the Indigenous way of life in Muskoka at that time. So it's covered on both floors.
And you'll also hear some of these stories in the listening stations as well.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over now to Ron Dick to thank our speakers tonight and to wrap up our Tuesday Talk series.
Thanks, District Governor Beth, or past District Governor Beth. First, before thanking the speakers, I wanted to thank our Rotarians at HIP. Bill Empey, Chris Schneider as the founding member, one of the founding members, John Andrus, and John Curry as the executive director of HIP, all Rotarians in District 7070. Thank you for all the work you do. It's that work that leads us to places like this. It's funny, you talk about canoes, and that's near and dear to my heart, whether it was canoeing as a teenager in Lake Simcoe and the Trent Canal system and Balsam Lake, and then later in Long Lake and through Round Lake and Lavage into Penage, where we had the permission of the Whitefish First Nations to be able to go through their lands. Just got a lot of great memories. So as soon as you mentioned canoe, you got my heart. So I can't begin to say thank you enough. Now, before I say thank you, District 7070 Rotarians, like Richard Detton in 7010, sitting up in Sudbury there, talking about going around all his clubs. I think we, maybe need to have a challenge here to see what we can raise to, maybe push those Northern Rotarians a little bit. What do you think about that, Chris?
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Okay, so let's do it. Bill Empey, Gary Getson, Rick McGraw, Tim Johnson, I can't begin to say thank you enough. I really enjoyed this at a really personal level as well as a Rotarian. I spent many times at the dock in Gravenhurst, My parents live up in that area. I'm so looking forward to this presentation and center when it gets opened. And I look forward to doing whatever I can to promote with our 707 Rotarians that we go big. Michael Parker, put that down. Come on, you're distracting everybody. But I can't begin to say thank you enough, folks. We're going to make a donation to the Rotary Foundation in honor of this presentation tonight. And I look forward to the opening of the center and look forward to working with you more to being a great partner with our Indigenous Canadians.
Yawa go, Ron.
So a round of applause for our presenters tonight. And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And this ends this year's Tuesday Talk series. So thank you everyone for joining us on the second Tuesday of every month. Hope you've enjoyed the series and learned a lot and piqued your interest. And we look forward to seeing all of you at the district conference this coming weekend. Okay, safe travels. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.